Ever get this like eerie feeling
Yeah.
that some people, they just knew the future was going to go a certain way?
Oh, yeah.
Like Nostradamus levels of, okay, how did they know that was coming?
Right.
You know, you wanted to really deep dive into his predictions about the Antichrist, especially all the connections to figures straight out of the Bible.
Yeah.
And we found this video. It's got some stuff that really makes you think, like seriously compelling connections.
Well, Nostradamus has had people scratching their heads for centuries, right?
Yeah.
So those writings he did, all those cryptic quatrains, they've just sparked endless debate.
Endless.
Especially when you get into the end times prophecies.
Oh, for sure. And the thing is, he didn't just talk about some vague future, right? He got weirdly specific about people who were alive centuries after he was gone. It's almost like he had some, like, direct line to history playing out or something.
Yeah, it's really something. And while people interpret his work differently, even back then when he was writing it,
Oh, yeah.
it's still fascinating to look at the historical figures that are like most commonly linked to his first two antichrists.
Okay, so first one straight up gives me chills.
Yeah.
Napoleon Bonaparte.
Oh, wow.
We're talking a guy who remade the map of Europe just through force.
Yeah.
Like ushered in what they call the Reign of Terror.
Yeah.
Not exactly, you know, sunshine and roses.
Right.
But here's the thing. Nostradamus is writing in the 1500s.
A long time ago.
A long time ago. And about Napoleon, and I quote, he says, insert Nostradamus quote about Napoleon.
See, and that's what gets me how closely it seems to echo what the Bible says about Abaddon. You know, the angel of the abyss.
Yeah.
Revelation describes Abaddon leading this devastating swarm of locusts, right? Tormenting humanity. And when you think about Napoleon's armies just sweeping across Europe,
It's an eerie.
leaving all this chaos and destruction, it's almost like a fulfillment of that locust plague imagery, isn't it?
Okay, you just made me rethink historical parallels. I'm not even going to lie.
Yeah.
Like whether you think Napoleon was a strategic genius or a ruthless dictator,
Yeah,
it's hard to ignore the connection.
for sure.
But Nostradamus doesn't just stop there. He's got a description of the second Antichrist.
Oh, boy.
And it's even more unsettling, especially the part where he mentions, like, the persecution of the Jewish people.
And of course, history gives that a really chilling resonance, doesn't it?
Sure.
It's like Nostradamus even hints at where the second Antichrist comes from, where they're born, saying, insert Nostradamus quote about the second Antichrist's birth.
Wow.
And then about their personality, how disruptive they're going to be. He says, insert Nostradamus quote about the second Antichrist's nature.
Now, if that doesn't sound familiar,
Yeah.
it's widely believed that those predictions, people interpreted them later on,
Yeah.
that they're talking about Hitler.
Which, you know, lines up with that whole King of the North prophecy in Daniel.
Yeah.
Daniel describes this really powerful, tyrannical dude coming out of the north, someone who literally makes war on God's people.
It's intense.
Given what we know now, it's hard not to make those connections, you know?
Yeah.
And this brings us to the part of the video that I know you've been waiting for, the third Antichrist. This figure, it's shrouded in mystery, right? It's a recurring theme, not just in Nostradamus' work, but also in a lot of the biblical texts.
Right. The first two figures are one thing, but this third Antichrist, the one who supposedly brings about the end of the world, that's the stuff that really gets the imagination going, especially for someone interested in end times prophecies. What did Nostradamus have to say about this supposed final harbinger?
Well, Nostradamus is never one to give us straight answers. He's all about cryptic clues. And for this figure, he drops a name that has sparked endless debate, Mabus. Some scholars even interpret the text to mean broad or Uzma.
Mabus. It's almost Shakespearean, isn't it? Like something out of Macbeth. This name alone has fueled countless theories. But how does Nostradamus' vision line up with what the Bible says about the Antichrist? Because they're talking about the same guy, right?
That's where things get really interesting. See, the Bible's portrayal of the Antichrist is a bit more complex. Instead of just one single figure, it describes multiple figures who embody the spirit of the Antichrist, culminating in a final apocalyptic figure who represents pure evil. And this final Antichrist, he's got quite the collection of nicknames: the Beast, the Abomination of Desolation, the Assyrian, the Abominable Thing, and of course, 666.
Wow, that's a lot of scary aliases for one being. It's like the ultimate rogues gallery all rolled into one. But if the Bible is a little less clear on a single person, are there any prevailing theories on who this ultimate Antichrist figure might be?
There are two main schools of thought among theologians. Some believe the Antichrist will emerge from within the Catholic Church, perhaps even a pope who consolidates political and religious power, becoming this dominant figure.
Interesting. So one camp is looking toward the more traditional seat of power. What's the other side of that coin?
Others point to prophecies about a charismatic and militaristic leader arising from the Middle East, possibly even from the ancient lands of Assyria, modern-day Iran, or Syria. This interpretation leans into a more outwardly powerful, potentially militant figure.
So we've got a potential religious leader, maybe from Europe, versus a militaristic figure from the Middle East. That's a pretty wide range of possibilities. But even with those differences, it sounds like both Nostradamus and the Bible agree on one key detail. This Antichrist has a particular interest in Israel.
Exactly. Both Nostradamus and the Bible describe a scenario where the Antichrist targets Israel, which then triggers a global conflict of unprecedented scale, plunging the world into chaos and destruction.
That's a heavy thought. And you know, as much as we love a good mystery, I think it's safe to say that none of us are eager to see those particular prophecies play out. It's weird, right? We talk about these big figures from way back, like Napoleon, and it's easy to just assume it was always going to go down that way. Like their part in history was already set in motion, you know?
Yeah, I get that. It's like this very human thing, trying to find patterns, trying to make sense of things that seem totally random. And when those events just happen to line up with some old prediction, it's easy to feel like, well, maybe we're not really in control after all.
Right. But what really gets me about this Antichrist stuff, especially that third one, the one nobody really knows, is that it makes these old prophecies feel kind of relevant now. Like, are we a few news cycles away from seeing that dark stuff actually happen?
It's only natural to see the connections, right, between what those prophecies say and what's going on in the world today. And to be honest, it wouldn't be cool to just ignore those feelings, those worries, especially given how much this topic matters to you.
Yeah, totally. I mean, we're not going to start pointing fingers here, but this video did get me thinking. If Nostradamus, if those biblical prophets, if they could actually see centuries into the future, like it was right in front of them, what did that mean about us? About the choices we make? Like, how much free will do we really even have?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? Do these prophecies have real weight? Or are we just reading into them, letting our fears and biases color how we interpret them? And even if they are true, does that mean we're stuck repeating the same cycles of violence and destruction?
Man, so much to unpack there. I guess at the end of the day, whether these figures were driven by some kind of prophecy or they were just ambitious people caught up in the flow of history, one thing's for sure, they show us just how much power belief has and how dangerous it can be. The choices people make, the movements they inspire, they echo through generations.
It's kind of humbling, and something to keep in mind, especially these days when we're bombarded with information 24/7. It's easy to get caught up in fear and speculation, but it's more important now than ever to be critical, to question what we hear, and to just talk to each other, really think about this stuff together.
Well said. It's been a trip exploring the world of Nostradamus, biblical prophecies, the whole Antichrist mystery. If there's one thing to take away, I think it's that the future isn't fixed. It's not set in stone. The choices we make, every single day, they matter. So as you keep learning about this stuff, keep that in mind. Keep asking questions. And most importantly, keep those brains switched on. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive, and we'll catch you next time for sure.